This conference will now be recorded.
Hello students, now we are moving to the next chapter. So we have already learned about the cell and the cell organelles we have learned, and after that the cell cycle, how a cell is dividing, and while dividing what and all processes or what and all things are happening inside the cell, and how the cell organelles or cell genetic material, how that is getting divided, everything we have learned, right? So while learning about the cell structure, cell and the cell organelles we have learned, then the cell division, about cell division, cell cycle and cell division. In the cell cycle and cell division, we have learned about mitosis, meiosis, everything we have learned. And we have learned about the structural organization in plants, right? The morphology of flowering plants we have learned. In that we have learned about root, stem, leaf, inflorescence, flower, fruit, seed, all these things we have learned in that. See, now all the basic ideas you got about a plant, right? Plant and plant cell, how it will behave or how cell division is happening, right? Now let's move to the anatomy of flowering plants. Okay, so in the anatomy of flowering plants, in this chapter, this is the sixth chapter, sorry, chapter number 6 in your uh, textbook, NCERT textbook. So in this chapter, you need to learn about the anatomy and functions of tissue system in dicot and monocot. Dicot plants and monocot plants, the anatomy of the plant and the functions of each tissue system, right? Cells and cells will together it will function and it will form tissues, right? Group of cells that is forming the tissues, and how it is working, how it is functioning, and what and all types of cells you can see, and what and all functions each group of cell or the tissue is performing in the dicots and monocots. That's what we are learning in this chapter. So let's start the anatomy of flowering plants. So we know that group group of similar or dissimilar cells, group of cells that may be similar cells or dissimilar cells, they will be having a common origin which is performing or which is helping to perform some common functions. So group of cells that may be similar cells or dissimilar cells of common origin, and that will perform or that is helping to perform common functions, right? That performs common functions. So those cells or that group of cells, those cells or that group of cells are classified into meristematic cells or meristematic tissues or permanent tissues. See, these common functions, the cells or the tissues which are performing a common function, they are classified into meristematic and permanent tissues. Meristematic, then meristematic tissue and permanent tissues, right? So now we need to learn about the meristematic tissues and permanent tissues. Okay, so first let's see what are meristematic tissues. Okay, here meristematic tissues, meristematic means they'll be always in the stage of division, right? They'll be always dividing tissue, and this is always they'll be in the stage of division, or they'll be having a dividing nature, and these Division means what is happening? Number of cells are increasing. So what will happen? That will make the plant to grow. So that is helping the plant growth, right? Throughout their life. If one branch, we are cutting one branch, again it is growing. That means those meristematic tissues are working and the regrowth is happening there, right? So the classification is taking place here on the basis of origin. Okay. On the basis of origin, this classification is taking place. So what is that? These meristematic tissues are classified into primary meristem, secondary meristem. Okay. Primary meristem, then second type is secondary meristem, right? So first let's see what is primary meristem. Okay, primary meristem. So this primary meristematic tissues on the basis of origin, that is classified into primary meristem and secondary meristem. Okay, so here this classification based on origin, it is classified into two, primary and secondary meristem. Okay, so the primary meristem, this is first derivative of promeristem. Okay, first derivative of promeristem. Okay, and this forms the fundamental parts of the plant. Fundamental parts of that plant. Okay, and here primary meristem, we said the cells of these primary meristem, they will divide in all possible planes. Okay, they'll divide, cells of this divide in all possible planes. Okay, so primary meristem is the first derivative of uh, promeristem, and here this primary meristem is forming the fundamental parts and the cells of these primary meristem, the group of cells of this primary meristem that will divide in all possible planes. Okay, these points, these are the three important points which we need to learn about the primary meristem. And next we are moving to the secondary meristem. Here we said based on origin, it is divided into primary meristem, or it is into two groups, that is primary meristem and secondary meristem. So primary meristem we have already learned. Next we are moving to the secondary meristem. Okay, so second one is secondary meristem. So what is a secondary meristem? Secondary meristem that develops in later stage of development. Okay, that forms in the later stage of development. So secondary meristem will develop in the later stage of development, and that always it will be lateral in position. Okay, as you can see, lateral in position. Clear? And in which and all stages the secondary meristem will develop? See, either this will develop at emergency stage. Emergency. Okay, this will develop, the secondary meristem will develop at the stage of emergency, or to affect secondary growth. Secondary growth or the formation of cork cells. Cork cells. So during these stages, you can see the secondary meristem. Okay, so secondary meristem that develops in the later stages of development, and that where the position of the secondary meristem will be, that is lateral in position, and during the emergency stage or to affect the secondary growth or during the formation of core cells, this secondary meristem is developing. Okay, so this is based on the origin, right? Based on the origin, we have done this classification. Next classification is on the function. On the basis of function, primary meristem, the meristematic tissues. Meristematic tissues are classified into, see, based on origin, meristematic tissues are classified into primary meristem and secondary meristem. One is based on the origin. Next classification is on the basis of function. On the basis of function, meristematic tissues, they are classified into protoderm, procambium, ground meristem. Okay, protoderm, this is based on the function. So first is protoderm. See, protoderm is the outermost meristematic layer of the young growing region. Okay, so what we can say, that is the outermost meristematic region. Which one? Protoderm. Okay, and this is seen in the young growing region. Okay, and here this is developing from, or this protoderm that is developing into epidermis. So develops into epidermis, stomata, and root hairs. Clear? So here the protoderm, which is the outermost meristematic region, that is seen in the young growing region. Okay, so the protoderm is developing into stomata, root hair, and epidermis. Okay, so you can see the outermost one. So we said the outermost meristematic region. So outermost meristematic region means what you can see: epidermis, stomata, root hair. So that is developing, that protoderm is developing into epidermis, stomata, and root hairs. Okay, so that's about the protoderm. Next comes the second one, meristematic tissue. On the basis of function, we are classifying the meristematic tissue into protoderm. Second one is procambium. Procambium. So here what you can say about procambium, this is made of narrow elongated cells. Narrow elongated cells you can see in this one. So procambium is composed of narrow elongated cells, and this is developing into primary vascular tissues. Primary vascular tissues. Okay, so here the important questions you can see here, the protoderm, that is the outermost meristematic region, and this where you can see this in the young growing region, you can see this protoderm, and how, to which form it is getting developed. So we said outermost layer. So this is developing into epidermis, stomata, and root hairs. Which one? Protoderm. Okay. So this is one important question. Here you may get confused when we are asking about protoderm, procambium, and all. And here again, procambium is composed of narrow elongated cells. That is one important point. And this is getting developed into which one? Procambium, or the cells of this procambium that is getting developed into primary vascular tissue. Okay, this is also very important. It is forming the primary vascular tissue. Which one? Procambium. Okay, next the third one is ground meristem. Ground meristem. See, this ground meristem, this is the precursor of ground tissue system. Ground tissue system. Clear? So this is the precursor of ground tissue system, and that is having large and thin walled cells. Okay, they're having large and thin walled cells. With large and thin walled cells, and this meristem that will develop into hypodermis, cortex, pith, and medullary layers. The innermost region, you know that, which is that hypodermis. Then next portion, which is coming while learning about the anatomy, we know that picture, it should be very clear. So first comes the hypodermis, epidermis comes, then comes the hypodermis, then what? Hypodermis, cortex, pericycle, then pith and medullary rays. Clear? So on the basis of function, meristematic tissues are classified into protoderm, procambium, and ground meristem. What and all? Protoderm, procambium, and ground meristem. That is based on the function. So based on the origin, primary meristem and secondary meristem, and based on their function, that is protoderm, procambium, and ground meristem. And next classification, that is based on the position. So classification of meristematic tissues based on position. Okay, so on the basis of position, here the classification is happening. So on the basis of position, it is classified into apical meristem, then intercalary meristem, and third one is the lateral meristem. Intercalary meristem, and third one is the lateral meristem. Okay, here, see, you can see here very clearly. Here you can see if you're cutting a shoot tip, each region you can see, right? So the primary meristem, then the vascular bundles here you can see, and the fate of primary meristem, like that we have given, right? So here you can see the epidermis portion, then the procambium, the ground meristem, protoderm. So all this, it's very clear in this picture. Okay. So these pictures, these two diagrams are very important. So if you're keeping that in mind, it will be easy for the explanation. For you, it will be very easy to answer the question, and it's very easy to learn. Okay. In a very good order, you can learn everything. So here, classification on the basis of position, we are going to say first one is the apical meristem. This apical meristem means where it will be. It will be at the tip of roots and shoots. At the tip of roots and shoots. Which one? Apical meristem. Next comes the intercalary meristem. And intercalary meristem that lies between the permanent tissues. Lies between the permanent tissues. So it is between the permanent tissues, which one? Intercalary meristem. Then the lateral meristem that occurs in mature region of roots and shoots. In mature region of shoots and roots. Which one? Lateral meristem. Okay, so classification on the basis of position. This is based on the position. So at the tip, you can see apical meristem. In between the permanent tissues, you can see the intercalary meristem, and lateral meristem you can see in the mature region of shoots and roots. So here the meristematic tissues are classified. Three classifications we have learned: on the basis of origin, on the basis of function, and on the basis of position. On the basis of origin, it is primary meristem and secondary meristem. On the basis of function, protoderm, procambium, and ground meristem. And the classification which is based on the position, that is apical meristem, lateral meristem, and intercalary meristem. Clear? Now, next we are learning about meristematic tissues over. Right? Next is about permanent tissues. See, classify the group of cells or tissues into meristematic and permanent tissues. Now, meristematic tissues we have learned. Next is about permanent tissues. Permanent tissues. Okay, so permanent tissues means these tissues, they don't have the ability to divide. Meristematic tissues will be always in the stage of division, right? But the permanent tissues, those tissues that lose their ability to divide, okay, they don't have the ability to divide. Okay, they don't have the capacity to divide, or they lost the ability to divide, and these cells are called as the mature and permanent tissues. They are the mature cells or mature tissues, right? And these permanent tissues are of two types: simple tissues and complex tissues. Two types of permanent tissues are there: simple tissues and complex tissues. Okay, simple tissues and complex tissues. So here, permanent tissues are those tissues which lost their ability to divide. So these tissues are mature permanent cells. Okay, so these are of two types. Which one? This permanent tissue, they are of two, these tissues are of two types, which are the simple tissues and complex tissues. So first, let's see what are simple tissues. Here, simple tissues, if you're saying about simple tissues means group of similar type of permanent cells, and they will perform a common function. Okay, simple tissues. Simple tissues means they have group of simple permanent cells. Right, group of simple permanent cells, and these performs a common function. Performs common function. Okay, so that forms the simple permanent tissues. Okay, and these simple permanent tissues are classified into parenchyma tissues, then second type is collenchyma tissues, and third type is sclerenchyma tissues. Okay, so simple permanent tissues are a group of cells which are performing a common function. Okay, so they are they are simple permanent tissue means they have a group of cells which is of permanent cells. Okay, means they are not in a stage of division, and they are performing a common function. And these simple permanent tissues are divided into three types: parenchyma tissues, collenchyma tissues, and sclerenchyma tissues. So first one is parenchyma tissues. Parenchyma, you know, they are thin walled and they have large intercellular space. Okay, so let's see this in detail. simple permanent tissues. From this you can expect questions. Simple permanent tissue, they are divided into parenchyma tissues. Second one is collenchyma tissues. And then third one is sclerenchyma tissues. Okay, so here parenchyma tissues are thin walled. Okay, parenchyma tissues are thin walled and they have large intercellular space. Intercellular space means space in between the cells. So they have large intercellular space, and most of them, or the major function of them, that is the storage of food. Function is storage of food. Which one? Parenchyma cells. They are thin walled and they have large intercellular space, and their main function is storage of food. Which one? Parenchyma. In simple permanent tissue, parenchyma, they are involved with large intercellular space and main function is storage of food. Okay, next tissue, that is collenchyma tissue, stick. Okay, and they're living, and the mechanical tissues we can say. Living mechanical tissues. They are the living mechanical tissues, and cell wall. Mechanical tissues, we said. Mechanical means they will be giving, why we are giving that name? They are giving some mechanical strength, right? So their wall, their cell wall is having thickening of cellulose. Cell wall with cellulose thickening. That's why it is giving the mechanical support, right? So that is of cellulose. Then apart from cellulose, they have hemicellulose, then pectin. Okay, so here collenchyma, we can say they are elastic. Collenchyma are elastic and they are the living mechanical tissues. They are the living cells and they are the mechanical tissues, and their cell wall is having thickening of cellulose, hemicellulose and pectin, which is giving that mechanical strength. Okay, next simple permanent tissue, that is sclerenchyma tissue. So here the sclerenchyma tissue, we can say they are dead tissues. Okay, living one is collenchyma. Living mechanical tissues are collenchyma cells or collenchyma tissue. Sclerenchyma tissue, that is composed of dead cells. This is dead tissue and that is providing mechanical support. Providing mechanical support to plants. Okay, so here dead cells means sclerenchyma. This collenchyma, that is elastic and that is having, this is having living cells and that is living mechanical tissue, and here the cell wall is composed of cellulose, hemicellulose, and or cell wall is having the thickening of cellulose, hemicellulose and pectin. Okay, sclerenchyma means they have dead cells, but that is also providing the mechanical support to plant. Okay, so here permanent tissues, that is divided into two: simple permanent tissue and complex permanent tissue. Here simple permanent tissue is made up of parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma. Okay, that is a group of cells which are performing a common function. So simple permanent tissue is classified as parenchyma tissues, collenchyma tissues and sclerenchyma tissues. Clear? Next comes the complex tissues, complex permanent tissues. Second type of permanent tissue, complex permanent tissues. Okay, here complex tissue means, or a complex permanent tissue means, that is a collection of different types of cells. Collection of different types of cells. Okay, and these different types of cells, they will perform, or they are helping to perform, a common function. Performs a common function, that is called as complex permanent tissues. Simple one means they are made up of single type of cells, right? Here the complex permanent tissue means that is a collection of different types of cells. Okay, different types of cells are there. That's why it is called as complex permanent tissue, and that is performing a common function only. Okay, here this is forming the conducting tissues. See, that is performing a simple, a common function like conduction here. So that forms the conducting tissues, and this conducting tissues are classified as xylem and phloem. Xylem and phloem. Okay, so xylem means that is a complex permanent tissue, and that is conducting water and minerals. Xylem conducting water and minerals. Okay, xylem is conducting water and minerals, and that is having, xylem is having four types of cells: tracheids, vessels, xylem parenchyma, and xylem fibers. Okay, so xylem consists of tracheids, vessels, xylem parenchyma, and xylem fibers. Okay, so conducting tissue, it is forming which one? Complex permanent tissue. It is forming the conducting tissue. It's performing the function of conduction, and in that conducting tissue is composed of two types like xylem. It is that conducting tissue is classified as xylem and phloem. Xylem is conducting water and minerals, and xylem is made up of tracheids, xylem parenchyma, xylem fibers, and vessels. Okay, next type of conducting tissue, that is phloem. See, phloem is a complex permanent tissue, right? Here xylem is also we are learning under complex permanent tissue, and phloem, which is a complex tissue which is made up of sieve tubes, then companion cells, phloem parenchyma, and phloem fibers. Phloem parenchyma and phloem fibers. Okay, so phloem, that is a complex tissue, and that consists of, or that is made up of sieve tubes, companion cells, phloem parenchyma, and phloem fibers. And here we said xylem is conducting water and minerals, right? What about phloem? Phloem conducts food from the source of food. Okay, so that is conducting food from the source. From the food source, it is conducting that food to the remaining parts. Conducting food from source to other parts. Which one is doing this function? Phloem. Phloem, and xylem is conducting water and minerals. Phloem is conducting food from the source of food to the other parts. It is conducting. And phloem is composed of sieve tubes, companion cells, phloem parenchyma, and phloem fibers. And same time, xylem is composed of xylem vessels, xylem tracheids, xylem parenchyma, and xylem fibers. Clear? So that's about the meristematic tissues and permanent tissues. Okay, these many points you have to learn about meristematic tissues and permanent tissues. Next comes the tissue system in plants. Tissue system in plants. Okay, so the tissue system in plants, like we can say all the tissues of plant which is performing some general function. That functioning may be irrespective of their position in the plant body. Okay, so all these are considered to form together a tissue system. So the tissue system in plants, that means based on the function. So the tissue system is performing a function, right? In which position it is, that and all doesn't matter. It is together performing a function in the plant body, and that forms the tissue system. Okay, so the tissue system in plant body together performs a function, right? Then according to Sachs in 1875, this came. So the principal tissues of plants can be categorized into three important tissue systems. Principal tissues of plant. This can be categorized into three important tissue systems. Three tissue systems. Which are they? Epidermal tissue system, then ground tissue system, and vascular tissue system. First one is epidermal tissue system. B is ground tissue system. Then vascular tissue system. Right. So the principal tissue system of plant. See, if we are taking or we are considering the anatomy of a plant, we can see there the epidermal part that is composed of a group of tissues. Then next is the ground tissues, and inside we can see the vascular tissues. So all these they have classified according to Sachs the principal tissues of all the principal tissues, main tissues of a plant, that can be categorized into three important tissue systems. Which are the three important tissue systems? Epidermal tissue system we can see, ground tissues we can see, then vascular tissues we can see, right? So these are the three important tissue system which we can see in the plant, and according to Sachs, these are the main principal tissues of a plant can be classified, or they can be classified or categorized into epidermal tissue system, ground tissue system, and vascular tissue system. Okay, now we need to learn one by one. What is epidermal tissue system? Here, the epidermal tissue system, epidermal tissue system that is derived from, where it is derived from protoderm. Protoderm, and this is forming the outermost covering, and here it can perform several functions like mechanical support, absorption, excretion, all these in plants, right? And the functions of this epidermal tissue system is mechanical support, absorption, excretion. Okay, And here the epidermal tissue system that consists of cuticle, then epidermis, cuticle, epidermis, then epidermal outgrowths, next stomata. So all this is developed from protoderm, and we know that epidermal tissue system means all the outer areas will be there. So in outer area, what and all you can see, cuticle will be there, epidermis will be there, epidermal outgrowths will be there, then the stomata, right? So here cuticle means that's a layer of fatty substances, right? And this is deposited on which side? On the outer wall of epidermis. And cuticle, this is a waxy layer, and this is in a dry condition, right? So here cuticle is protecting the plants, those who are living in the dry areas and all, right? So in desert and all, they'll be having a cuticle layer which is like a waxy substance, and it is preventing the transpiration of that plant, right? And next comes the epidermis. Epidermis means the outermost layer of cell which is made up of closely arranged living cells, right? Outermost, epidermis is the outermost layer of living cells, and those cells are closely arranged. And root epidermis, root epidermis will be having root hairs, right? And that is made up of parenchymatous cells, and they don't have intercellular space. Okay. Then we said about epidermal outgrowth. Epidermal outgrowth means that is developing from the epidermis. Epidermal outgrowths develops from where? Develops from epidermis. From the epidermal cells that outgrowths are developing, right? So this epidermal outgrowths, you can see like trichomes, that is the epidermal hairs which are present on the stem. Okay, trichomes which are present on the stem outgrowths, epidermal stem outgrowths, trichomes. And these trichomes, they are of different types like hairs, then scales or root hairs. See, hairs means they have secretory function, and they are divided into glandular hairs and non-glandular hairs. Okay, and scales or squamiform hairs, that means disc-like plate or multicellular. They'll be having that multicellular structure, or they have flattened structure also. Then what about root hairs? Root hairs, they are originated from the trichoblast of epiblema. Trichoblast of epiblema. Which one? Root hairs. Then emergences. Emergencies means they are emerging from that part which is helping for protection, which is helping for climbing and all. They are called as emergencies, which are the multicellular outgrowths. Like we can say the prickles, which is helping in uh, climbing, then that may help for protection also, right? Then we said stomata. Stomata, this is present in the plants, and they are the minute openings, right? And this stomata is surrounded by guard cells. Stomata is surrounded by guard cells, and they have neighboring subsidiary cells, and this collectively called as stomatal apparatus, right? You have the detailed structure of stomata and the supporting cells or the guard cells, and the neighboring subsidiary cells, which you need to learn while learning about the stomata, right? So epidermis of all green aerial plants or aerial parts of plants, they have minute openings which are called as stomata, and this stomata is surrounded by guard cells and neighboring subsidiary cells, and together it is called as stomatal apparatus. So that is about epidermal tissue system. From epidermis, which and all types of tissue systems are forming, right? So cuticle is there, epidermis is there, epidermal outgrowth is there, stomata. Clear? So epidermal tissue system, this is the dermal, otherwise it is called as dermal tissue system. Dermal tissue system, and epidermal means from the epidermal area, what and all outgrowths or what and all cells, which type of cells you can see. Cuticle will be there, then epidermis will be there, epidermal outgrowths, then stomata. This and all you can see in the outside, right? So here the tissue system in plant, that is divided into epidermal tissue system and the ground tissue system. So ground tissue system is there, then the vascular tissue system, which is inside, right? So the epidermal tissue system we have learned, and ground tissue system and vascular tissue system, that you can learn with the help of diagrams, and that we will be learning in the next class. So here up to this, what and all we have learned about meristematic tissues we have learned. So based on the origin and based on function and based on position, meristematic tissue classification has done, right? Based on origin, primary meristem and secondary meristem, and based on the function, protoderm, procambium and ground meristem. Based on position, apical meristem, lateral meristem and intercalary meristem. Then about permanent tissue, meristematic tissue and permanent tissue are there. So permanent tissues, here you can see simple tissues and complex tissues. Simple tissues means parenchyma tissues, collenchyma tissues and sclerenchyma tissues. Means xylem and phloem, right? And the tissue system in plants, that is categorized into three important tissue systems: epidermal tissue systems, ground tissue system and vascular tissue system. So in that epidermal tissue system, already we have learned, which consists of cuticle, epidermis, epidermal outgrowth, then stomata. Next, ground tissue system and the vascular tissue system we will learn with the help of diagram in the next class. Okay, thank you.